Tuesday, 30 AD, 3 days before his death. Jesus arrived at Lazarus' house in Bethany later than people normally travel. After an emotional ride into the city of Jerusalem the day before, and after a reflective trip to the temple that led on into the evening, one would expect that our Lord would sleep, but he did not. It says that Jesus awoke early in the morning in Bethany and promptly returned to Jerusalem, where several key events were going to occur. In the morning, on his way into the city, he became hungry, it says. So he stopped by a nearby fig tree to eat. When he saw that fig tree sitting there that Tuesday morning, nothing was on the tree, and he cursed the tree, and he sentenced it to perpetual fruitlessness. And that would have resulted in it being chopped down and set on fire, as many fruitless trees would have been done at that time. Now this act confused his disciples, Mark 11, 12 through 14. And it intrigues us today. Why was Jesus so angry at this fig tree? As you might suspect, there is much more going on in the scene than what first meets the eye. The text tells us that Jesus was hungry. Perhaps he and his disciples awoke before Mary and Martha could prepare them breakfast. This is, of course, speculation. But what is crystal clear is that Jesus did not curse the fig tree out of divine supernatural immaturity. He is not so bitterly disappointed at the tree and in the lack of fruit thereof that he throws down a Zeus-like hissy fit and he zaps the tree. Instead, Jesus is doing something different. He's doing what many of the prophets of old would do. He is performing a lived-out miracle, which is called a sign act, that is meant to be a wordless parable in order to showcase important truths to his audience. These acts that prophets do involve extreme cases of judgment, as in the case of Isaiah walking about naked for 3 years of his ministry in the city, Isaiah 20 through 24. You'll remember Ezekiel building and attacking a model city that he constructed in his book, Ezekiel 4, 1 through 3, or Hosea marrying a prostitute to showcase God's fury at the adulterous nation. The whole book of Hosea lives out this theme, and as you see, these lived-out parables are often in extreme circumstances. So when Jesus acts out this parable, cursing the fig tree, he is pronouncing swift judgment on the city of Jerusalem. The tree represented the city of God, the one that was supposed to be healthy and bearing him fruit, Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. But instead of finding the city in a healthy place and about the Lord's work, bearing fruit for God, Jesus found her spiritually withering and barren. And he curses this simple fig tree. The overarching point is that the end is not only coming upon this tree, but it's coming upon fruitless Jerusalem and her fruitless temple. Her days of bearing no fruit for God will soon be over in 40 years, a single generation from the events of this day. Matthew 24, 1 through 3 tells us about it. The Roman armies would descend upon the city. They would burn it to the ground, just like the farmer who would uproot the dead fig tree and throw it into the campfire in a long overdue way. The scene was a lived-out parable by our Lord. It was an act of judgment of God upon the fruitless city. Now think about the symbolism here. Jesus curses the fruitless tree en route to the fruitless city. The meaning takes on vivid severity when we see what it actually means. Now from there, Jesus continued into Jerusalem, and he approached the fruitless temple, which was the epicenter of the rot of the disease in Israel. This was the same temple that he inspected the night before and found no fruit in it. On Tuesday, like a wise gardener, he began pruning the dead branches as a last-ditch effort to save the tree. This meant cleansing the temple from the paganism that had actually infected it. In the temple, specifically in the court of the Gentiles, the outermost court, men and women were buying and they were selling and exchanging currency. They were filling the courtyard with all kinds of commerce and industry. And this pushed the Gentiles out of the court that they were supposed to belong to, and they were no longer able to pray to the God of the nations. All of those who were infirm or ceremonially unclean also likewise were pressed outside of the temple complex with no place to worship Yahweh. Mark 11, 15 through 16. Instead of this being a place of prayer for the Gentiles, sinful men, sinful Judeans, had turned it into a den of robbers and thieves who would make a profit out of their cold, dead religion. Like the barren fig tree that Jesus cursed moments before, Jesus diagnosed their fruitless deeds, and he drove them out of the temple complex with a corded whip, John 2:13-17. And he promised to give the kingdom over to those who would produce its fruit, Matthew 21:43. Do you see the irony? Jesus went into the fruitless city, and he's going to take away the kingdom from a fruitless people, and he's going to give it to the Gentiles who would bear his fruit by the Spirit's power, some 60, some 100-fold. The whole parable was coming true right before their very eyes with astonishing clarity. Once the temple was cleansed, all of those who were driven away out of the outer courtyard returned. This would have included the Gentiles. Yes, they would have come back in, and they would have praised God for Jesus' work of chasing the money changers out of the temple. But it also included those who were perpetually unclean. According to the law of Moses, people who suffered various diseases and other physical abnormalities would need to be kept at a distance from the temple. The reason is deeply embedded in the ceremonial law. But the short answer on why Jesus did this is that God's presence is ferociously holy. Even perfectly clean priests would need to go to extraordinary lengths to be in God's presence. So there was a danger in approaching God in a cavalier way. Unfortunately, the Pharisees relished policing the courtyard and prohibiting people from approaching God. They functioned as purveyors of God to the masses, and they were more than happy to exclude anyone from knowing God, especially those who crossed them, especially in how they interpreted the law of Moses. And while it is clear that they misunderstood the entire heart of the law, Jesus demonstrates that he understands it rightly by cleansing the temple, by healing the sick, the lame, and the infirm, and the diseased. In this way, he not only provided them access to the temple, he provided them with the entire point that the temple existed for, by meeting with them face to face. For in that encounter, the weak, the sick, and the infirm were approaching their covenant God face to face with Jesus Christ in a way that they never had before. The entire point of the temple was being fulfilled before their very eyes in Jesus Christ. And as results, anthems of praise began reverberating from the outer courtyard in ways that had never been seen before. The moment was pandemonium. The crowds were clearly excited. They were crying out, "Hosanna to the Son of David," which means, "Son of David, save us now," Matthew 21:15. Unfortunately, not everyone in the temple precinct was filled with praise. This loud and public display of affection to Christ, sadly, did not last long. The Jewish elites who saw this going down not only refused to join in and celebrate with the peasants, but they openly challenged Jesus. In spite of all of the good that God was doing through his one and only Son, they took this moment to critique Jesus and to also denigrate the crowd who was praising him, Matthew 21:16. They sensed that power was slipping from their grasp, and that they were ready to do whatever it took to get it back. After a short exchange, Jesus departed the city once more, and he left to spend another night with his friends in Bethany, Mark 11:19. While Jesus and his disciples were sleeping, the power brokers in the city of Jerusalem, they were awake, and they were planning how they might destroy him, Mark 11:18. Things were certainly heating up in Jerusalem, and we will see that more in our episode tomorrow. So if you will join us as we explore what Jesus and his disciples were doing tomorrow on Wednesday, 2 days before his death.